the Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan podcast. Navigating success through uncertainty.
Hello and welcome to our podcast aptly named Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan with Charlie and James. Short introduction from your two hosts. Charlie?
Background, army, utilities, and then 18 years ago formed my own consultancy, and now I'm working for Data Barracks in the same role as a business continuity consultant.
A little bit from me then, very similar to Charlie, except I didn't go military, I went police. So I did 30 years in the cops, and then I've done the last 12 years now, would you believe, in retirement, doing business continuity, crisis management and stuff with my own consultancy. So we don't waste any time, let's jump into our fabulous topic of the day, which is all around leadership under pressure, why executives freeze. So I'm just going to paint a picture. Imagine it's mid-morning, it's a busy day, and unfortunately systems are partially gone down. Customers are starting to notice. Internal messages are coming in faster than anyone can read them. The executive team is called to form a crisis management team, and they've naturally invoked the strategic level plan. And yet, nobody's making any decisions. So what we're going to look at today is why this happens, why capable, intelligent, experienced leaders of the organization occasionally freeze in a crisis. And the big question we're going to keep coming back to in this is it down to poor crisis leadership or a failure of training or governance? So let's start off with a little bit of background there. So what do you think, Charlie? When people hear the word freeze, they imagine that the executives have gone into sort of panic, throwing themselves out of windows. But in reality, is that what freezing actually looks like?
Yeah, you see, I think it's such a big topic. I'm sure we could do about half a year on this one. So I think the first thing is, before you even touch how the executive are responding, or whether they got business continuity plans, whether they're trained, whether they're not trained, whether they're emotionally intelligent, whether they're not, is you need to start at the beginning, which is a very good place to start. As a family, we're all
song.
I was still
do the Van Trop,
yeah,
Van Trop family song in a minute.
compulsory view over Christmas.
We watched some Sound of Music over Christmas, and you're aware.
I love the Sound of Music. But I think
Beautiful.
one of the first things you have to think about is actually, as I say, even before that the crisis hits, is you need to think about your past reputation, your brand loyalty, how you are perceived as an organization to behave. Are you, unless your organization's nobody ever heard of, and are you known for treating your customers well, or you're not known for treating your customers well? So that will very much, even before you start and the first kind of movement from the organization happens, is going to dictate how people respond. So I think that is one of the first things, that even before that thing is, and I think organizations need to be self-aware to say, actually, how will the customers perceive in an incident? How will they react to different sorts of incidents? I don't know what you think of that thing, is even before you do the crisis response.
It's all in the planning. Eisenhower, and I know I've quoted this before, in for planning for war, plans are worthless, planning is essential. It's all about the planning. But if we're looking at sort of freezing, I mean, I have seen this operationally, where the people are in a room, more on exercises than actually in reality, because my background is very policing, and it's the day job. Incident management, dealing with things like this, was a huge part of the last 2/3 of my career was spent in incident management. So the people that were there were pretty good, because they had to be, because it was an everyday occurrence. And I think this is one of the problems, because the executives in an awful lot of private sector organizations don't have that level of experience and opportunity to practice. And what it looks like, I've seen it, is they're very calm, they're very professional, they look like they know what they're doing, but in reality, nothing's actually happening. It's all flowery and nice, and we're asking for updates, and we need more emails, and we want more information. So anybody looking in who doesn't quite know what they're doing is thinking, oh, well, this is going well. But in reality, they're not actually doing much.
Yeah, I think there is some sort of, I was having a little look at this, there is some sort of psychological reasons why people panic under stress. And basically, a crisis is a stressful situation. And, your thinking narrows, it's more difficult to assimilate information. A lot of those biases come in. What's the bias where you take the first bit of information and you kind of say, well, that must be what's happening. So all further information confirms
commitment bias, where you
commitment
go
bias.
with one idea and away you go, and you're going 800 mile an hour at 3,000.
And it's often the first bit of information you get, which is often actually either too extreme or not extreme enough. It's usually one of the two. It's very rarely right. But then your decision quality gets poorer. Your listening gets worse, and so it's more difficult to pick up signals of things coming in, and your behavior often changes. And I'm sure you'll give us a kind of examples of that, of in your police, say, where people who were nice, sort of gentle, polite people suddenly turn into raving megalomaniacs and shouting at people. And, so I think
to type, don't you? I mean, Steve Peters, the professor, talks about the inner chimp. And it's a great book. He was a keynote speaker.
I'm writing that down.
A number of years ago. Lovely guy. And he talks about the inner chimp, and he talks about under stress, under pressure, you go back to what is your natural behavior, which people, there's basically 4 different ways you can go, and if you read the book, it goes into that in great detail.
That's a note for you readers or listeners.
It is a note for readers. Plug for Steve's book.
Yeah.
But I'm a big thing about, I think why freeze is because people haven't got anything to hang it on, so they revert to the normal decision-making habits. So executives under pressure think this is just another day in the office. And clearly it's not another day in the office. But if they've never had a really bad day in the office, what have they got to hang that on? Now, do you think a great crisis management plan can get them over that? Because I don't.
Well, you see, I think a little bit. I think in the initial bit, and I'm sure you remember from your police time, and I remember, you got simple SOPs, ways of behaving, because under pressure, you can't freeze. You know what to do.
Yeah, but is freeze, because flight, freeze, or fight is basically what these people are doing, and they're stuck in the freeze. But until it actually happens, are you actually going to know how you're going to react?
But you see, I think I go back to my military days, and it says dash down, crawl, observe, sight, fire. And that's what you did. As soon as you come into contact, you could freeze and say, hey, some bugger's trying to kill me. Or you could dash down, crawl, observe, sight, fire. And that's probably way out to date there. So that's showing my age, because you probably do something different now. But you just try and run away from the drone and hope that your thermal cloak doesn't get you. But those SOPs at the most simplest basic level were there to kind of instantaneously you do something instantaneous. And I think we need to have some of those SOPs, which, it's more difficult. It's not a sort of, we're not going to have people dashing around the crisis room, but I think you do need something like that, which gives you
what do you think about decision models? Because if you look at the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Program, there's quite a nice little decision or a model in that, which is basically, what's the information, what does it mean, what options do we have, what legal and regulatory requirements are there, what are we actually going to do, how are we going to do it, and then monitor and review. And it's not a bad little thing to spin. Now you've got to think that back in the day, because back in 2007, I invented this thing, a decision model that later became that model, in fact. And it looked, and we used it a lot with frontline firearm officer training, because people were going, the decision model is too cumbersome. You can't spin it quickly enough. Well, firearms officers, within less than half a second, spin that model. What's going on? What does it mean? What are my options? What am I going to do? Did it work?
You see, you've got your SOPs, you're remembering it already.
SOPs are great. And I think the beauty of having a decision model, for example, within the crisis management plan, and I always do within the clients that I work with, and we train it and exercise it constantly, and we have it on little flip cards in your wallet and things like that, is the moment it happens, get it out, follow it, because what it does is it almost jump starts the brain into thinking as opposed to panicking.
No, I think there's absolutely, I'm a great believer in crisis management having some sort of handrail to hang on. And I think those decision models are just brilliant, because as you do, you can remember them, you can remember it live there, and it gives you some structure. And I find a lot of time in exercise and real instant, people just don't quite know where to start. They kind of have a lot of things doing, and they'll kind of cycle around and think about it, and they'll go back and think about it again, and go back, think about it again. And they're kind of, they don't really want to make a decision because they don't want to cut out their options, but they need to do something, and they kind of swirl around. Eventually they get sorted. That's why I'm a great believer in agendas, but I do like that structure for people. At least you can follow it with your finger. We use situation, direction, action, which is the same thing but situation. But I was looking at the TODA decision model, which is used by aircraft, is people in it's taught to airline pilots, and that is, you know, if your plane, you suddenly get a goose in the engine, then it is time. You know, how long do you have to make the decision? I'm running out of fuel in like 20 seconds, or I'm going to crash in 5 seconds. Diagnosis: what's the problem? What's my options? What's my decision? What am I going to do? Is my decision the right thing? Is it have the desired effect? And that is, again, one a bit like your firearms people, where you're having to do that maybe in 5 seconds, where hopefully our crisis people have a little bit more time. But I think the model is still the same. Having a decision-making model, a handrail, I think is absolutely important. Otherwise, you swirl around, get overcome by it, and you just do nothing, and you freeze. So, yeah.
Do you think, though, nowadays that a lot of the freeze is caused by, I know we're going to call it cognitive overload, which is the technical expression, but just too much information?
There may be too much. I think there's also a lot of context and bias out there. You know, when you're taking decisions, you're never actually acting in a vacuum. It's never kind of a decision or a crisis is taken purely on its merits. It's actually, what sort of company are you? What sort of relations do you have? What sort of narratives does it play into happening worldwide? I was just looking at research. I was doing, classic one is Cracker Barrel. I don't know if you ever come across the Cracker Barrel, but it's I
remember Cracker Barrel from the 1970s.
Well, it's still.
No, Cracker Barrel of cheese or something.
Yeah, it probably was. But in America, it's a chain of kind of rather, I think that probably ties in nicely. It's a chain of rather folksy kind of old-fashioned restaurants. You know, these sort of chain of American restaurants, very folksy, very old-fashioned, sort of stuck in the doldrums a little bit in terms of getting new people. So it decides to reinvent its logo. And this absolutely goes mad in America, and all the people pile in and say, oh, it's, and say this outrageous, shouldn't do it, boycotting. But it wasn't just something about actually an organization updating their logo. It was about actually playing into some of the narratives in American society where, lots of people want to go back to that traditional life, and traditional is good, and very anti-woke and that progressive feeling. So this company prides itself in the middle of a kind of diverse storm, which is if it just did it on their own merit, then some of its customers say, well, I don't like it. Some of its customers do say it, but it's playing into a narrative already, which is very divisive in America. And so they have a massive problem. So my point is, no crisis could be seen in a vacuum. It has to be seen in the factors round about it. And the canny crisis manager will see the crisis as it is, not in, oh, maybe if I just communicate a bit more to my customers, or maybe the customers really understood what I'm trying to do, it'll all be all right.
Yeah, but can they do that on their own? I mean, go back to your military days, my policing days, and look at the information to intel. The people at the top in the private sector just get everything. Because generally what happens is the people at a tactical level, they don't have an intelligence cell that feeds tactical and strategic. They basically get all the information that comes out of ops and they deliver it all the way through the organization to the top. Now, academics have worked out that the people at the top only need 15% of information to make the right decision. And rather than giving them information, they need to be given intelligence and they need to be given decision options, not what do you want us to do? The people at the top don't solve the problem. The people at the top deal with the consequences of the problem. Therefore, they need the intelligence or the advice to make the right decision. And I think a lot of problems within organization is because they've got no idea how to turn information into intel through contextualized analysis.
Yeah, and I think I do think you need people around you. I think how often when you do exercises, because we're now in the exercise bit rather than the operational bit, but how often do you exercises do you actually see that you present there as part of the exercise decision? How often do you see, right, guys, go away. I'd like 3 of you to go away, think about the decision, come back with me some options, and come back with some we never see it. They discuss it. No. They swirl around. They have a little discussion. They use the agenda, but they very rarely get some options, and it kind of like everyone veers in one way. And I think you also get that if you come back to the post office, that kind of group think of we all ought to do that, or you get that kind of reinforcing where I know what the boss wants to hear, so I'll, because it's career limiting if I give the boss bad news, or if I give him what or her, what is they don't want to hear. So I'll always do that. And, if you look at some of the politics at the moment, I'm not going to go far politics at the moment, that is exactly what is happening. A lot of people say what the boss wants to hear, not what the truth is and what the reality is.
Yeah, I mean, it's the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? Where, challenge is healthy. The problem is that the executives within that room, there would normally be the leader of the crisis management team, who may well be someone like the chief exec or the COO, someone like that. And the people in the room are contemplating whether or not they have the bravery to challenge. That's if they know what they should be doing. I mean, if we've got the sheep factor, where groupthink can also be a bit of sheep, where I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll just agree with everybody. Or it can be that no one dares challenge the leader because the leader of the team can stop you with a look. Now, how many times have we seen that? As we say, mostly nowadays in an exercise, but I've seen very, very powerful, dare I say, narcissistic leaders in teams where everybody sits there, and when they all go for a coffee, they all go, oh my God, I'm not quite sure about this decision. Do you really think that's the right decision? I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. And everyone goes, yeah, well, bring that up when you go in. And they go in and then they sit there. It's a little bit like, almost like watching an episode of The Traitors. Everybody knows what they should be doing, but they don't know whether they should challenge, because if they do, it makes them vulnerable. So how do you get over that psychological I don't dare challenge? Do we load it with alpha people, wherever there's a great big bun fight in there and everybody's throwing tomatoes? How do we get the balance right where people are prepared to challenge?
Yeah, you see, I think it's really difficult, because I think it is all that, you can have a successful team that manages very successful organization, makes lots of money, does lots of good business, And are they necessarily good in a crisis? They might be very good technically, they might be very good financially, they knew the system do it, but are they very good in a crisis? And I think this is why we have to exercise and exercise and exercise, because you have to practice that together, and you have to practice that team dynamic. So one of my questions within all this is, and you must have seen lots of leaders in your time, is what do you think is the importance of emotional intelligence in this thing? Is that a key factor in crisis management, emotional intelligence, or is it's
I think
another
it's more
facet?
important than the technical aspects. The emotional intelligence, the creativity, the building people around you who aren't scared of challenging, the understanding and reading the room. You know, I mean, 70% of communications is non-verbal. I've been in, I mean, I used to run a course for the European Commission before anybody was sent on a humanitarian mission or a civil protection mission. They'd come through my security course if they wanted to be security leaders. So they'd come through my course. So we'd get 22 people coming from all over Europe who you might have met before, but you probably hadn't. And there'd be a real mixed match of people chucked in a room. And if you look at how that group then worked within that environment, the way it took them a really long time to understand where their position was in the group, how important the team leader was in driving that group and making sure that they were on the right footing and the right lead, whether or not they felt comfortable of challenging. And it would take an awfully long time for that to kick in. And the problem is, you mentioned it earlier, do we give the people enough? Do the people at the top actually assign enough time for their own exercising and training?
Yeah, and I would counter my emotional intelligence importance with, I just remember one of our commanders, who I still dislike, but you know, and he was quite
Don't name and shame though, Charlie, for God's sake.
Yeah, no, I won't name and shame. But if there's any KSB listening to this, they will know who exactly would do it. Who used to be had a reputation in more of his or junior or middle officer, punching officer, because that was his former discipline. And when we went to Northern Ireland, he ran a very, very tight shop of patrols and ways of managing these rebuilds we were doing. And he was very much, he didn't really care about the people as a whole. He wasn't an emotionally intelligent person, but none of us were killed. And he got a DSO for that particular operation. And I think he did it because he was pretty good at the military and making sure that everybody did their job properly, maybe at the detriment of a few shoutings and a few kind of not very emotional, intelligent kind of behaviors. But he got the job done, and he got nobody killed, and he got a DSO for it. So I suppose you can have a certain amount of ruthlessness to you if you need to get the job done. And some people are just good at doing that. You know, they may not be emotionally intelligent, but they are very good. I suppose you could call him a very good technical leader, and he managed to achieve that. No, I don't think he'd be very good in a crisis if he was a Marks and Spencers or something which is much more kind of customer orientated. You can't run around and shout and punch people, because that's not quite you can't punch your customers for not liking your answers.
Do you think in protracted incidents, crises, the human elements need to be nurtured more? Because if we're doing a quick and dirty, I mean, if you were going out and doing something really quick and dirty, done and dusted within half a day or a day, then I think the team can probably tolerate somebody who is a little bit more dictatorial as opposed to inclusive. Yeah. But I think if the event runs, Marks and Spencers, it was a lot longer than 46 days in the wilderness. But 46 days was the actual impact on the customers. And then clearly it went on much longer than that. But say they had, and I don't know what they had, but say they had a single crisis management team leader. Imagine the pressure on that team. Could you have led a purely technical, non-humanistic approach to the team for that duration and not been thrown out the window by the team?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things in crisis manager you have to say is, how do we achieve success? What does success look like? And that's around a bit by your strategic intent. But sometimes in crisis is just getting your operations back up and going is not enough. That is not success. Oh, we got our production back up and going 10 years, but we alienated all our customers. We didn't care about them. We didn't communicate them and tell them going, oh, but we got our operations up in 10, in 10 days after the incident. So I think you have to understand what you're trying to achieve. We're doing a business continuity plan for let's say it's a store that provides building materials. Now, their definition of success in an incident is saying, I need to make sure that if somebody turns up to my store and we have whatever the disaster is, they can get the products they want from our store. I don't care if they don't pay for it. Give them it for free. We'll take an
Right.
IOU. We'll get them to pay later. I don't care. All I care is about the product delivered to that, because our whole raison d'etre is, you turn up in our store, we've got all the product you want. So that is, again, it is important in saying, if they restored the finance system first, it's not what the business needs. They need to have the logistics and the getting the stuff from here to there and into the stores.
But
So I
see,
think it is
that's a
you.
key understanding of the
Yes.
needs of your customers
Yeah.
versus the needs of the business. The needs of the business are financial, but the needs of the customers is they need the raw materials, the building materials, whatever they need. And I think that's a good part of also business intelligence, but emotional intelligence connected to the needs of their stakeholders.
Yes, and I think that is, we go full circle on this. This is defining factor, is to say, what do we want out of this? We actually want to keep our existing customers. We might lose a few during the way, but actually for us, it's about, and it can be an opportunity to gain extra customer. I was just remembering, um, was it Kentucky Fried Chicken? I can't remember what the date is, and the FCK. They probably, out of their crisis, they didn't have any chicken in their stores. They got in their crisis, probably ended up with more customers than they did at the moment, because as soon as that happened, everyone went, KFC. Oh yeah, I've forgotten about that. I haven't been there for ages. I better go to KFC because I used to love that chicken.
They apologized and they used humor to poke fun at
Yes.
themselves for their inept approach to supply.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really good at emphasizing how bad they were and how much better it's going to be going forward.
Yeah, and I think it is, that's emotional intelligence, because they use the right. They recognize that if they killed three customers through food poisoning, then that kind of like FCK might not be the.
Would it have to get to three though, Charlie? Because you were quite specific about three there. Maybe one. Maybe
Yeah.
one might have been enough potentially.
Yeah.
What do we think? Because I'm conscious of time.
Yes, I know. As I
The
say, we
whole
could do
point
3
is
months on
about
this.
the impact of governance and training, because I'm keen on governance sets the context, gives the executives the authority, the empowerment, I don't have to be worried about making a decision because I'm going to be backed by the board.
Yeah.
And then the training gives them the I know what I'm doing based on the context of the empowerment I've been given. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is the sort of 3 things going on there. There's the people. So who's going to manage this incident? And I think, as trainers and professionals, we don't have a lot of choice over that. We're given who we're getting. There is the training so that they can practice it and they can get their muscle memory and they get their SOPs and things like that. So we can influence that, but they need to give us a certain amount of time to do it. And I think there is the handrail of the plan or your decision-making model or your agenda. It doesn't matter which decision-making model, but you have a handrail, you have something you can hold on to, which gives you a process to do it, especially with all that kind of stress that's going on. So I think training and procedures is, to me, absolutely important.
Summing it all up, any wise words to finish off with?
I think in a decision you have to understand what is the context of your incident. So what outside influence could influence you, nothing to do with your own organization, like the Cracker Barrel example. That's not the cheese in the 70s. But also making sure that you understand what does success look like. What does our organization need out of this crisis to survive and thrive? And if you can understand that, then it's much easier to try and work out what you need to do it.
I mean, I'm keen on, your business continuity plan is your handrail, as you said. It's not your be all and end all. It's to support you. We've got to train people not just in these are the roles and responsibilities as in the plan. We've got to go wider than that. And what happens under stress? I have a questionnaire that I use. It's an adaptation of a couple of academics called Honey and Mumford, and they looked at decision making under stress. And I use it with some of the organizations I work with about that reverting to type. I know that when I'm stressed, I revert to a certain type. Now, when I know what the negative aspects of that type are, and I become quite assertive, I know that I can, because I know I'm going to go that way, I can fight it. As Steve Peters' good old The Inner Chimp, you can't completely override it, but you know it's coming. Your triggers are there, and you can counter it. And I think people need to understand that they're not going to be the perfect people in a crisis. And when they know that, and our exercises need to put them under that, they then go, I recognize the negative bit. I now need to counter that. I'm being too demonstrative. I'm being too this. I'm being too that. And then if everybody did that, we would create an environment where people can then make better decisions. And the last bit is about governance. Let the people at the top, your shareholders, the board, have got to understand that you can't perform miracles. Crises very rarely come out with massive positives. I know KFC is potentially a change to the rule on that, but normally you've got to understand that it isn't going to be perfect. We're going to make imperfect decisions, and we should feel comfortable that that is the environment we're in, and horrible things can happen. And we do the best we can. It's a little bit sort of, the best endeavor, but not best endeavor as in you're awful. Best endeavor as in, if you look at the circumstances as a whole, actually, the team did pretty well and not nail them to the cross. So, once again, we've come to the end of another, what I would suggest has been a really interesting topic, which, as you said, right at minute one, you could do a whole week on this, to be honest, and go beyond. And we might turn this into a series at some point. But I'd like to thank all the people who are listening for being with us. Any ideas of future podcasts, please let Business Continuity Training know. Send them an email, give them a call, and they'll pass that on to us. If you've enjoyed it, and we're on all platforms now, as you're probably listening on one of them, please subscribe, comment, and tell your friends about it, or your enemies. Tell both. So it's bye from me, and it's
bye from him, or me.
Bye now.